Hi, my name is Jenna Agnello, and I will be discussing the Texas snowstorm that took place earlier this year and how the government handled the crisis. So let's begin with the background. The infamous snowstorm took place from February 13th to 17th, 2021, which resulted in a very large amount of Texans losing power. The storm also impacted Mexico and Canada. These blackouts lasted anywhere from hours to days in different areas of Texas. The state struggled to fix this issue because the majority of the state operates on their own power grid under the name Electric Reliability Council of Texas, otherwise known as ERCOT. The rest of the U.S., besides Alaska and Hawaii, are connected to either the Eastern or Western Interconnection Power Grid. This separate grid is in place because the Texas government wants to avoid federal regulation in electrical sales. About 70% of ERCOT customers lost power during the winter storm, which equates to roughly 12 million people. Along with electricity, heat and clean water were inaccessible, leaving many people in deadly conditions. Around 150 Texans died to hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, falls, fires, traffic accidents, and exacerbation of chronic illnesses, but hypothermia took the most lives. Let's discuss public awareness. The crisis would undeniably generate a lot of public awareness. First of all, Texas doesn't typically receive snow. On the occasions that it does, a snowstorm like this is usually not the outcome. For example, in 1951, San Angelo, Texas, received a record-breaking 2.5 inches of snow. During the 2021 storm, they received 10.1 inches, which is almost 5 times the amount of snow that this area has seen. People were puzzled by what caused this awful weather in a state that is relatively warm 365 days a year. As climate change is becoming more commonly understood and seen in everyday life, many were quick to deem it as the cause. Many news articles even state that the collapse of the polar vortex is to blame for this storm, a direct connection to climate change. An unusual natural disaster mixed with something as devastating as climate change is likely to spark the public's interest, therefore garnering attention. Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, and earthquakes in California are all natural disasters that received a lot of public attention, but that's something that's more likely to happen than a winter storm in Texas. Therefore, this atypical crisis was going to be notable. So who were the key publics? Along with the residents of Texas, the entirety of the United States was the key public in the crisis. Many Americans like to know what's happening during a natural disaster, and this also posed as an opportunity to help out Texas. The government is another notable public. Typically, the government plays an important role when it comes to any disaster in the U.S. So, who's to blame? This situation negatively affected not only Texas's government, but the electric grid company in the public eye. Many say that both organizations are to blame for the deaths, injuries, and overall lack of preparedness during this storm. ERCOT was warned a few years back to winterize because the freezing of instrumentation and equipment would be the biggest and most probable issue. Governor Greg Abbott, a day and a half into the crisis, blamed Texas's wind turbines as the root of the problem. This was a complete lie that would further harm the government and its officials. The wind turbines that did not freeze actually helped to support the power grid along with solar panels. Abbott then went on to place the blame on ERCOT for the crisis, even though they were practically powerless in comparison to the policies that were put in place regarding the power grid by the government. The Texas government are the main culprit for the downfall of the state during the storm, and ERCOT simply operates beneath it. So, what was the government's means of communication with their residents? Governor Abbott's initial interview where he blamed the wind turbines was filmed on Sean Hannity's show, which is aired by Fox News. The utilization of a news outlet is practical during a crisis, but how many Texans were actually able to view it during a statewide blackout? He also told residents to call 311, which is a number providing non-emergency municipal services, visit the state website, or even just Google warming centers. Once again, how were people going to acquire this information if they didn't have access to the internet, televisions, or phones? This suggestion was very unhelpful to many Texans. So, as many of you might be able to assume, there was little respect to be had for Texas's government. Their weak response to the natural disaster frustrated many people, and Twitter was especially active during this period. And here I have just 2 tweets of thousands of tweets that can be found about the disaster. So this first one here says, this is a good time to note that the electrical grid in Texas was privatized to avoid federal regulation and increase profits to a small number of wealthy individuals. This second tweet says, in Texas, when we lost all our power this year due to the snowstorm and the grid was knocked out, the malls and skylines still had power. Their lights still illuminated empty corporate buildings in downtown areas while people froze to death or died trying to get warm in their cars. This is just two examples, as I said, of thousands that can be found on Twitter and other public sites. It's safe to say that the public would not say that the Texas government did a good job with resolving and managing this crisis. So what's the takeaway of everything? Well, the Texas government was quick to blame everyone but themselves. Rather than operating on their own power grid, they should look into putting more time and resources into keeping their residents safe. The desire to save and make more money for a small population of already wealthy individuals puts the majority of others in grave danger. So how can Texas improve in the future? Say this may happen again. Well, the Texas government should have taken more responsibility when it came to this devastating storm. By blaming everyone else, they quickly ruined their reputation because at the end of the day, the government has the most control over operations like the power grid and protecting the residents that reside within it. Hopefully, Texas will use this storm as a learning lesson to revamp their grid, switch to a national grid, and spend more time, money, and resources on their people. Thank you for listening.